That's what happens. Cheers, everybody. Look at that. Got a little sidecar and everything. Fresco beverage. It is the weekend. And we're live. So everything's good. 7:17, a little bit late, but you know, we're making a drink. Trying to breathe that in. Tonight we're going to talk about moment of inertia. And so I put up a photo of a set of 18-inch wheels and tires that I put on my, I'm thinking it was an 07 or 08, something like that, Toyota Yaris. The motor was all stock, although eventually we did put again, with my buddy from Jimmy from HP Performance, put a small turbo on it and ran it with an AEM. But before that, we tried a few things. I actually made a custom header for it, adjustable, naturally, because that's how we do it. Made a breathe in my drink. I need another drink. So I made a couple of parts for it. So I made a custom intake manifold for it. I made one with actually for a photo, but because we never employed it, but that one that had a direct fogger nitrous stuff set up. And so I made a custom aluminum intake manifold, air intakes. We tried. I made a long tube header for it, and we made adjustable primary lengths to try to, dial in where the thing wanted to make power and stuff. And like I said, we put a turbo on it. But we also put a TRD suspension kit on it. And part of that suspension kit was these very cool looking 18-inch wheels and tires. And they were awesome. I mean, they made the car look a lot better. I loved the way it looked with that, especially when it was lowered and stuff. It had 18-inch wheels. It had very, very, looked like basically you just painted the outside of the wheel. It had very low aspect ratio tires. So very little tire there, basically. Mostly rim, which is, if you take a look at a rendering of a cool car, that's what they have. It's just mostly wheel filling it out. And when it's lowered, it makes that even better. It makes that even more dramatic. So the car was lowered, and I think we put sway bars on it and stuff, and did a suspension install up. I did that for my book that I wrote on B segment performance. So all these little cars, Honda Fit, the Yaris, the Scion XB, the XD, I can't remember others. And so a lot of them didn't have performance parts, like they didn't have people, shops or manufacturers catering to their stuff. So a lot of these things I had to make, so turbo kits and stuff. And so salute to Jimmy out there for helping me out with that. That was great. But the thing I want to talk about tonight is the change of moment of inertia. And the test, I actually did a back-to-back dyno test on these TRW wheels. And not surprisingly, compared to the factory wheel and tire package, they lost power. Now, why would they lose power? Well, we had two changes that were very important in our wheel chassis dyno test, because we ran this test on a chassis dyno, which is a good place to see changes in moment of inertia. So the moment of inertia, according to Wikipedia, I'll give you a quick definition. Let's see. Otherwise known as mass moment of inertia, angular mass, second moment of mass, or more accurately, rotational inertia of a rigid body is the quantity that determines the torque needed for a desired angular acceleration about a rotational axis. So what they're talking about is its resistance to rotation. And if you have, and in the calculation for moment of inertia, you have two things, and we changed both of these things on this particular wheel and tire package upgrade. We change weight, which is very important. So if you put, guys know, if you put a heavy flywheel on a car, obviously it will resist rotation, initial rotation. If you put a bigger diameter, that's the other thing. And the thing that people don't realize is, you need to be concerned about the weight. You do, but the distance from the center is squared. So it has much more of an effect. The diameter has much more of an effect, basically where you have that weight rather than the weight itself. So you can have a change in weight, but if you have a change in weight also and a change in diameter, which is exactly what we did, because not only was the tire bigger in diameter, the wheel and tire package, but it was also heavier. So it had both things going against it. And you didn't even need a chassis dyno to you just needed to get behind the wheel of this thing to understand that there was definitely a loss in power. If you drove this car for any length of time with a factory wheel and tire package on it, and then you put these wheels and tires, no matter how fantastic they look and how much faster it would now go around a corner, because it definitely handled better with these. But it did not accelerate nearly as well. And when we tested it on the dyno, I'm thinking that it was 6 to 7 horsepower. I have to go look on another computer, because all of my DynoJet chassis dyno stuff is on another computer. It's not this one. This is normally the one that I go to check that. But I think that I remember it being 6 or 7 horsepower. So it was quite a bit relative to the amount that was there, because a Yaris doesn't make a lot of power at the tire anyway. And so when you change it by that amount, you can definitely feel it. And you can feel it you could feel that the car did not accelerate the way that it did before. And so this is one reason why when guys put, when you have a vehicle and you put one of these like tiny little Tilton triple disc clutches like we had on our World Challenge car, when you have that on there and you bring all the weight in, centrally located, you obviously want there not to be less weight. And there is, if you make something smaller, usually you can make it weigh less. And then if you bring it in toward the center where it's rotating, then you also improve the snappiness. So that's why, this thing feels like a race motor. Yeah, it did. It felt a lot better when we put this Tilton triple disc clutch on it. And it arguably could have made more power too. But that's the thing. And I've done this test before where on a small block Chevy, because when we're running at West Tech, we have a steel flywheel and a steel drive plate. And then we have an aluminum flywheel and an aluminum drive plate. And if you run those two combinations, or any combination thereof, but those two combinations would be the biggest differential, you'd see a change in power just from the change in weight. Now, in this case, they're both the same diameter. So we're not seeing a big change there. But if you were to change the diameter, which you could, you would definitely see a change in power. And that's also why, conversely, that's why when we see changes when guys are talking about making changes in the crankshaft weight, like, we gun drilled the crankshaft. That's fantastic. It's lighter, and light is better. Don't get me wrong. Light is better everywhere. It's better for, reducing this moment of inertia, for changing the moment of inertia, for making the thing spin up faster. It should improve power, but the closer it is to the center line, the less of an effect it will have. If you change the weight out on the counterweights, you'll get more of an effect. If you change the weight of the piston, which is even farther away, you get even more of an effect. So you want to, if you're going to change the weight out there. Also, you want to change, ideally, if you're wanting the car, because what I was going to talk about is when you're changing weight, the other thing that changing weight does is improve. It improves power, it improves acceleration, it improves stopping, it improves handling, it improves everything about the vehicle. So there's a huge change from changing those things. So you definitely want to do that. When you're talking about handling and stuff, unsprung weight, more important than sprung weight, because the suspension is resisting some of that stuff. And so it's helping you out. But wherever you can get weight, wherever you can drop weight, good idea. If you can drop weight in the rotating assembly so it makes more power, that's even good. And this is also why things like, if you take a look at, I did some testing way back on carbon fiber drive shafts, aluminum drive shafts too, but carbon fiber ones were very cool. And they did indeed show more power on the chassis dyno. Although, because you're getting rid of the weight, you are, which helps, but it's still not, if you don't change the diameter at all, it's less of a gain than it could be. If you could make it also smaller, that would be really good. And you might argue that you could, with the right metallurgy, make something smaller, make it a little heavier, and still gain, and you could do that. So, and we see this with things like big tires and wheels, basically on anything. So an extreme example of this are, a lot of times guys bring trophy trucks into West Tech. You bring a trophy truck in, and it's got a gigantic wheel and tire package that weighs, a few 100 pounds a piece. It takes a lot to spin that. I mean, it needs to be that beefy for what it's doing, just like all the suspension parts and the Heim joints and all those things need to be ultra beefy, because they're, running this thing at 130 miles an hour and jumping over rocks and banging it into stuff. And so it has to be beefy to be able to withstand the abuse that you're putting it through. It has to be that. And so these wheels and tires are gigantic and they're super heavy and they resist rotation. And so when you run, let's say you're running an 800 horsepower big block or even a small block, which is certainly possible in those kinds of racing builds, and it only makes 600 at the tire, it's not because there's this percentage change between these things. It's because on that particular application, you have lots of things that are super beefy and super heavy that are absorbing a lot of this power. Transmission, drive shaft, rear end, axles, wheels and tires, all of those things that you obviously don't get that same loss through a Honda. So that's why we see those differences. So let's see what you guys got going on. And that's my discussion on moment of inertia. Wheels and tires can make a big difference. If you put big slicks and especially if the slick is bigger than, I mean, it's going to be harder to turn anyway, because if you put slicks on if you were to take a regular wheel and tire package off and put slicks on, especially if you don't have any, if you want the thing to hook up and you don't have any tire pressure in it, it's definitely going to make less power with the slicks on it. But if you get it to hook up and then they grow like they're supposed to, then good things happen. That will be another discussion for another day. Let's see what you guys got going on. Get a poll up here. Have you guys ever done a wheel and tire change and felt like it made less power? Have you guys ever experienced that? The problem is, like with this Yaris, even though I knew, I mean, it felt like it made less power. It did. And when we dyno tested it, it actually did. So I not only did it feel that way, because sometimes subjective feeling doesn't match what's going on with the dyno. Sometimes we do things and we want it to make more power and we'll swear that it makes more power only to test it and find out it actually didn't make any more power. In fact, it could have made less power, but that's not what we want. Now, this thing felt like it made less power. I dyno tested it, did make less power, and still I was conflicted about taking them off because they look so good. It made the car look awesome, and that's part of the deal. If that's what your thing is and that's what you like, that's part of the deal. And also, it did make the car handle a lot better because that 18-inch tire and wheel package, the car would handle a lot better, and I like going around corners. But the Yaris already, even the stock tire and wheel package, felt like it needed another 100 horsepower. And then with that wheel and tire package, it felt like it needed another 150. And that's what happens. But then everything needs boost, right? 18 by 12s. 18 by 12s, that's a big wheel and tire package. 20 by 12s for my C10. A stock 5.3 Silverado made 311 at the wheels on a Mustang dyno. A stock one made 311? That seems really high. This made the first live stream I've actually caught. I didn't realize they were this late. 7 o'clock. I try to make them at 7 o'clock every night. And then I also have one during the day sometime. It's usually random. I sized the wheels and tires to fit the brakes. No bigger than necessary. That's good. We did that we actually ran a wheel and tire package on the Del Sol, this one right here that we won the touring car championship with. We sized the brakes so that we could run a particular wheel and tire package because it actually made the car handle better and made the car accelerate better. And we had wiggle room on the brake setup because the car wasn't making a lot of power. It made 165 or 6 at the tire with the B16, with the stock B16. And we had really good hawk pads on it and stuff. And even with the stock, it had 4-wheel disc brakes. Even with those brakes on it, it stopped very, very well. So a magazine where the Honda got all the bolt-ons and the quarter-mile times kept going down. The bigger wheels and tires were put on. The times went back to about stock. That's what happens. I remember driving the guys from Sport Compact Car, Dave Coleman, and I'm trying to remember the name of the other guy. They did a deal where Honda, I think, gave them a GSR, and they did a bunch of stuff to it, header and air intake and exhaust and all that stuff. and they put wheels and tires on it. And then they, because they were trying to, then Honda came out with the Type R, and so we got to drive both of those cars at the streets of Willow. And I remember driving the GSR thinking, this thing feels a little underpowered, and it's got no limited slip. And then I remember driving the stock Type R. I'm like, oh, this thing is like miles better than this modified GSR. I wouldn't want that. And I'm a fan of the GSR too, but that stock Type R was just like head and shoulders a better car. It was a better combination. One of the interesting tests I did, and I saw that I think that the who are the guys from Australia? Somebody remind me who the guys from Australia are. They're Freiberger and Finnegan have done stuff with them, and I subscribe to them. I watch them all the time. I just can't remember their name, but they have recently, and other guys have done this too. And we did it long ago. We did a comparison where we did this on a Miata. So we did suspension upgrades. So we did shocks and springs and bars and stuff and wheels and tires. And then we did a power upgrade. So we put a Jackson Racing like supercharger on it. So we spent the same amount of money on both of them to find out which one of them ultimately made the most performance. And we measured performance. Obviously, you're not going to measure performance by quarter mile deal if you're doing suspension upgrades and wheels and tires. We did it at I think we did our test at Laguna Seca. So we did lap times at Laguna Seca. And suspension, wheels, and tires are way better than putting, I think we added another 100 horsepower or something, but it was not even close to being better than the suspension, wheels, and tires were. All the car and driver test 0 to 60 is faster on the smaller wheels. Yep. Like 17 is an 18s on the cars that's the size of my 4th gen Mustang. I remember when 16-inch tires on the Corvettes were, those were gigantic. Those were really cool. "90 wheel horsepower." That's probably about what it was. I don't think I have. I don't think I have it on this computer. I can take a look and see, but I don't think I have the wheel horsepower stuff on here. Dyno results. I'm not going to have Pontiac, Suzuki, Holder, Bonneville, Suzuki. The Suzuki made 150 horsepower at the tire, for if anybody's interested. But no, I don't have the Yaris there. But I think that's probably about what it was. I think we look at the and mine was a Yaris S, so it had the body kit on it. Let's see, Toyota Yaris. I can't even remember. I want to say it was like 105 horsepower or something. It was not very much. "106 horsepower." Yeah, that seems right. Yeah, so it had been in the 90s, the 90 wheel horsepower thing. Admiral, 1 inch is not going to make a big change. Gear ratio is key. Gear ratio also makes a difference. I know Jim Bell did some testing on running, and he did it with Mustangs. So they did different rear end gears, and then they naturally did. It's pretty easy to do transmission gear tests too. All valid arguments. Planned 1,000 wheel horsepower, 8.5 bed C20. Never see a track, so mostly for looks. And okay, well then it's pretty easy to make 1,000 horsepower. When my Silverado was stock, it had a cold air and catback. Went from 16-inch wheels to 18s. Lost 1.5 mile per gallon. That wouldn't surprise me at all. I don't think I've ever owned a car or truck with larger than 16-inch wheels. I think my Silverados are bigger than that, right? The 70s Nova. So are you going to find something better than a 15-inch rally wheel to put on a Nova? Unless you want to put big brakes on it. Noodles. So you had the flywheel machined on your quad 4 down to 11.5 pounds. That's a good idea. From 17 pounds, that's a good change. 17 by 9s, 275s. I don't. Daryl did a 2000 Trans Am wouldn't have come with a 17 by 9 275 40 all the way around. I don't think, right? It would have been like a 245 tire on that thing, right? I have an 87 Camaro LT that I'm running 5.3 4L60 factory V6 car. I'm changing the rear end 4th gen 323. I currently have 22-inch IROX. Cool. Over the fall, I swapped from Pony 16s to 18-inch Celine wheels, Cobra brakes. And that's the other thing. Brakes will do that as well. If you go from an 11.5 or probably 11.5-inch brake up to a 12 or 13 or 14 brake, it will make a difference in power. Weren't the billet flywheels in the 90s for manual trans turbo Mustangs to maintain engine speed? I don't know. I don't know if that's the reasoning behind it. My friend's F-250 diesel got some big tires, which weighed a lot. Yeah, and the diesel, I remember looking at when Oliver was, I was there, when he was taking out the transmission from the Nova with that turbo diesel, the flywheel on that thing was gigantic and it was super heavy. Was the Yaris just signed before Scion? No, it was not. The Yaris and the Scion were run simultaneously. I had both of them. I actually had all three of them. How long can injectors sit before they clog? I don't know. Who did the rear gear testing? The guys from Kenny Bell did it. Do bigger wheels and tires, bigger, heavier wheels and tires will put more load on your transmission and diff. My tuner was telling me that twin turbo Vipers that make north of 800 wheel horsepower, always those cars with 12 or 13-inch wide wheels gain like 60 horsepower just by putting the front tires in the rear. We've gained 25 or 30 horsepower at the tire on kit Cobras by just putting more air in the tire. So if that gives you an idea. Let's see. Mike's in the house. I must have scrolled down some here. Is it mostly the weight that kills power, or is it due to the change in the final drive ratio? This is a change in moment of inertia, not a gear ratio thing. 2012 Yaris is rated at 106. I know they need one. They need a Yaris. Like, I like the Yaris. I like the way that it looked. I like the way it drove. I honestly didn't think that the Yaris got good enough fuel mileage to justify its little motor. Like, that motor needed to make twice as much power. That car would have been fun with 200 horsepower. I also had a Ford Focus, and I love the Ford Focus after I put I think it was a drag turbo kit on it, or an F-Max, I think. Frosty cold beverage. And even with 7 or 8 pounds on the thing, it was so much fun. Definitely felt that 93 S10 4.3 liter manual won't scratch fourth gear anymore. It is. It'll make a difference. But the thing is, and again, this is like the downside that I was talking about with the Yaris, is that if you put more tire in the back and you get better traction and you get better acceleration, you can put more power down if you were traction limited. Obviously, that's a good thing, even if you're losing some power because of the tire and wheel change. How would you counter the loss in power? Another pound of boost would work really well. Is there such a thing as overkill as far as spring rate for valve springs? I'm about to get, yes, you can. You do not want too much valve spring. There's no need for it. Got 22-inch on my F-150, but the weight is the same as a 20. However, the handling improved dramatically due to less sidewall. That is good, but you also need to look at where that weight is. So when you change even if you didn't change the diameter and you didn't change the weight, if you change where that weight is, like if the weight is now more outward, you're going to change the moment of inertia. When are you redoing the Chopper Copper cam test? I was wondering if you could throw in a TSP Mad Max cam as well. Also, low lift rates for 87 horsepower. I don't know what cam that is, and the Chopper Copper is really the marketplace competitor for the Truck Norris cam. Ricardo, also not on topic. We don't have to be on topic. We're all good. I've been watching all your custom intake videos. Where can I buy one of your famous books? They're available through Amazon and stuff. I have some of the Hemi ones here. I probably have a couple of the other ones here too. Try to design a 3D printed variable runner intake for a 462 valve NPI PI head. You're going to make that intake fit both of those? Mighty Car Mods, that's who it is. I like those guys. I love anybody that flies from Australia to Japan to get parts for their car. Just tuned a pretty much stock 99 Sierra 5.3, 430s, and built 4L60 with 17s. Feels like it has more power and accelerates faster than the 20s with 20s on it. Yep. Someone should make an adapter run 4V Cleveland head intakes on 2V heads. We did we ran the Edelbrock intake on 4V heads, but the intake was quite a bit smaller than the heads were. Bigger wheels and tires will hurt mile per gallon. Yes. I just got here, but Hoonigan tested this very recently with some pre-runner-esque truck, and I just remember the difference being much less than I thought it would be. This was a significant amount given the relatively low power output of the motor, and you could feel it from behind the wheel. I mean, I'm a road racer, so I'm fairly sensitive on these kind of things, but still, I think even the average guy could feel that the thing was felt felt more sluggish. The Suzuki was a Suzuki Kazashi. It was a 2.5 liter 4-cylinder that we went 202 or 3 in. 150 at the tire went 204 miles an hour. I don't know what you're talking about because nothing that makes 150 at the tire will go 200 miles an hour unless it's probably a streamliner or something. Z71 package on the O2. It is a Z71. Should be 17s. Would having a car 100% give you advantage on the strip where you lose traction? As opposed to having what? If you're running boost, if you're running boost on a 5.3, you need to have 6.5 thousandths per inch of bore. So anywhere in the 28 to 30 range is what I run. The WS6 had 275s all the way around. That's a big tire and wheel package. Put aluminum flywheel on my quad 4. You put an aluminum flywheel on your quad 4 and it lost 15 miles per gallon. I find that really hard to believe. You just said your Suzuki made 150 horsepower, went 205. No, what I said was that I had a dyno test of the Suzuki when it was stock and it made 150. When we went 205, it was not making 150. We modified the motor quite a bit. We did a lot of stuff to it. Most notably, we put a good sized turbo on it. Did anybody see Boosted Lifestyle's turbo comparison video really good back-to-back dyno testing? I haven't seen it. What did he test? Jake, Richard, has anyone ever mentioned Corn F3D 3800's YouTube channel before? He's got a turbo 3800 Fiero making 680 horsepower. It's super cool. I haven't. I'm not familiar with that, but I do like the 3800 in the Fiero. A V6 swap Fiero would be awesome. Yeah, Google, that'd be really hard to do. In a typical car, a Honda or the Suzuki or whatever, if you had 200 at the tire, 100, that's it. That's the 150 to 160 mile an hour range. Yeah, how do you lose 15 miles per gallon? That's a lot. Like 1.5 miles per gallon, that could be something I could get behind or at least believe. No such channel as Corn. Okay. Boosted Lifestyle turbo comparison back to back on a hub dyno. Uh-oh. Best thing I've seen yet. I went from 36 miles per gallon to 21 miles per gallon, had to rev higher to leave stoplights, and took more throttle to maintain speed. Going to a lighter flywheel, that's not what happens. The reason modern cars have big tires and wheels is because people care about the way that the vehicle looks way more than anything else. You need a moderator in here. Yeah, that's me. I'm good. I'm good with that. Especially after a few drinks, I'm fine. Yeah, big. I mean, and that's the other thing is that, and that becomes the problem. Somebody mentioned big brakes too, and that's the problem is if you put 18 or 19 or 20-inch wheels on your car, now you have to have brakes to fill that up. Otherwise, if if you go up in wheel and tire size, especially if it's spoked like it should be, because those are awesome and they're good for cooling. If you have a big wheel and tire package on there, all of a sudden your brake looks inadequate. You need big brakes behind there too. Admiral, I don't know how to answer your question because I don't know exactly what you're testing and what you're trying to achieve. And I could help you if I knew more about what you were doing. Have you seen some of the rotor diameters on newer cars? Yeah, I mean, and especially if you look at something that has performance brakes on it. I mean, you might have. I mean, I remember when a 13-inch rotor was really big. Now it's nothing. Boosted lifestyle results were very interesting. 100 horsepower gain on the large turbo compared to what? And at the same boost level and stuff? Because that 100 horsepower on a bigger turbo at the same boost level, if you have two turbos that will both supply the amount of airflow that you need for the power level, you won't get that. That won't happen. Let's see. Refreshing to be in a room that doesn't turn up politics. No, we don't allow politics here. People get booted for that. You can't have civil, like, analytical conversations about that because people aren't analytical about that at all on either side of the aisle. My car was 15 miles per gallon lightweight turbo, except I added a cam and turbo at the same time, and I switched to E85. They sell tape on caliper covers on. I know, I've seen those. I've seen the covers for them. And I've seen the ones that they sold that I remember, they sold a bunch of them. They sold them for to stop brake dust from getting on the wheel. That's how much people care about how the wheel looks. Is they don't care about, like, okay, I'm going to put this cover on there. I'm going to essentially overheat the brake rotor now. But as long as I don't get dust on my shiny wheel, that's all that matters. You see my high field drums. I know, Ken. I know it's the CRX high field deal. The drums are tiny, tiny. But the nice thing about drums is that they get better fuel mileage. Let's see. I'm scrolling back because I went down too far. I think for a street car, run what you like. That's form versus function versus practicality. It's all of those things. Like I said, I'm a performance guy, but I'm also a handling guy. So I like a car that, like, has performance, but also brakes and handles and does all those things. So it's always this trade-off thing. Like, yeah, we all want the camshaft that makes all the low-speed power and all the mid-range power and all the top-end power, except you can't have that. So what do you choose? You choose the one that you choose. And the same thing with this is, like, the tire and wheel package made the car look awesome. And I have to admit, I like the way that it looked. As much as I am a form should follow function kind of guy, it looked awesome and it handled great. But it probably stopped worse and definitely accelerated worse. Jim, 5.3 turbo S10, dynoed at 675 at 15 pounds, 112 VP. That's good. Drove my five. Is that a stock 5.3 then? Drove my 5.3 around the yard. I'm guessing that's a stock cam, right? Trucks that do any type of off-road are better with high sidewall. That's true. Because what a lot of people don't realize is that the tire is a big part of the shock valving and the spring rate. Probably both of those, right? Yeah. I lost mile per gallon, changing to a stickier tire. 3 to 5 miles per gallon is a really, really big change, and I would want to see the data on that. I've run lots of sticky tires on stuff because we ran around with back in the day a GSCS or an R1 or a Hoosier R3 SO3, that kind of thing. And to lose 5 miles per gallon, like if you were getting 90 miles per gallon and you lost 5, that's really not that much. But if you're getting 30 and you lost 5, that's a huge percentage. And is it because you did an actual test, or is it because you were driving the thing harder now with the stickier tires? Yeah, that blue collar, that makes a lot of sense. Stock horsepower peak is 5,500. If you want to change where the motor makes peak power, you have to change the runner length and you have to change the cam timing. Head porting will also do that. We bring back the Junkyard Walk series. Yeah, I wanted to do one while I was down last time. I just didn't have time. I love walking through there. That's like one of my favorite things. Which I really appreciate you talking sense into people. Bigger's not always better. That's true. I had a salt flat disc on my XP for a while. It looked cool. They do look good. They're not great for brake cooling, but they're all like arrow and trickery. Grassroots Motorsport did testing on the wheel size versus handling thing many years ago. Okay, I'm scrolling down. Daniel, he compared 76, 80, 85, and 88, but did not give back pressure readings on the test. The 76 millimeter turbo maxes out at 26 pounds, so he compared all of them at 26 pounds. So he's comparing them at a flow rate that the turbo can't support. So that makes sense then. If he's maxing a turbo out and then putting turbos on now that can support the power level, because it's not just a pressure level, but what we should see is like let's say we ran a turbo test and the smallest turbo could make the same boost as the other turbos, but does it like 1,000 RPM earlier and then falls off. And then we put the bigger turbo on, and it can support that boost level because it's controlled by the wastegate from 4,000 all the way up to 7,000. Well, if the other one fell off, that one's not going to fall off, and now it's going to make more power. That's how turbos work. So I just don't want people perpetuating the nonsense that they think that if we run a GT35 and we're making 500 horsepower, if we run a GT55, we can make at the same boost level like 100 more horsepower, because that's not reality. Oh, Milo's barking. take into account the transmission computer rely on final drive ratio to schedule shift points. A smaller tire can change without changing lead, but it's not going to change anything when you're cruising at one steady RPM down the freeway. Ever tested an Elgin sloppy stage 3 cam? I have not. Was the drive ratio talked about when talking about bigger wheels and tires? Well, you can change to bigger wheels and tires and then not change the final drive, not change the diameter of the wheel. That's possible. For the same outer diameter, the taller the sidewall, the lower the polar moment of rotating assembly. So are you saying then that the tire portion of it is heavier than the wheel portion is? The puppies are doing awesome. When we ran this Del Sol, I did a lot of research on finding the lightest wheel that I could. We were kind of stuck on a tire package because we were going to run a Hoosier R3 SO3 back in the day because we knew that that was the tire for that car. It was the stickiest tire that we had available back then. And so I found some, I don't remember what they were. There were 17.7s. They were Volk racing wheels. And those were the lightest wheels we could have. I wish that they were 7.5s so that we could spread we were running a 205 tire. Some guys ran 225s. I thought the 225 was a little bit big for what we were doing. If I had a 7.5, I probably would have tried a 225 and we would have done lap time tests to see if it worked. But the 205 on that 17.7 on the Volk racing wheel was very light and it worked out fantastic. This point maybe have been already discussed. Larger diameter tire, all else equal, puts a larger patch on the ground. Okay. You mean for each rotation? I've assumed that the tire portion is heavier than the wheel portion in the past, which would make taller wheels with lower profile tires would be more efficient, but I have no evidence. We would have to measure that to see what that change is. And we have to see with different kinds of wheels, because with different metallurgy in the wheels and different wheel designs, that may or may not be true. The more distance from the center, the more the weight matters due to rotation. Yes, we talked about that in moment of inertia. The distance is squared and the weight is not. Admiral, I have some tests up on the behead stuff where we did the short runner, cut out the, because the beheaded deal, they did the crossover stuff. So we had some manifolds where we cut essentially half of those out. And that's a pretty big change. And I also did my Super Richie custom intake manifold too. Smaller wheels with taller sidewalls are lighter than larger wheels with shorter sidewalls. Okay. Have you measured that? Have you verified that that's the case? And what wheel and tire we're using? What tire was a steel belted radial? What was it? There's a lot of variables in there to say that as an absolute. Physics for motorsports is good. That is good. Yeah, Julius, we didn't have good luck with making that shorter runner deal work. The one that we tested didn't have radius entries on it, but it just was not good. I just got here after listening to Adam Carolla and Norm Macdonald comment on Kenny Rogers songs. Those are two good guys. For 1998, the 464 valve used a completely different intake port and intake manifold bolt design than 99. Oh, yes, we know that. I tested both of them. The other issue with big wheel and tire is also the minimum tire pressure and even how well it can take a low pressure situation like a nail on a tire. Burns, did you get my dyno vid on your email? I haven't. I don't think I did see it. Yeah, the off-road stuff is definitely beefy. The drag donks, I think, are awesome. I mean, anything that has 1,000 horsepower at the tires is going to go fast, right? So what about staggered wheel sizes like Corvettes, for example? Is there a performance benefit? Well, if you have a staggered tire setup, if you have a 275 in the back and a 245 in the front, let's say, then you set up the suspension for that. The more tire that you can put on a car, the better it's going to handle, as long as you can get the other things working with that, with those tires. Cutting 6 to 8 inches off a manifold is crazy. Peak power, I don't think it's going to be 13,000 RPM. Can you show us how to do math from engine RPM to tire rotation? Are you trying to find top speed or what are you trying to do? And I would defer to Wallace Racing calculators. They have everything. I have a math book where I use to tell us how to do speed for gear and stuff. Julius, the Boss manifolds actually work very well. I'd like to be able to figure out power, torque, and speed outputs on paper by looking at the engine graphs and various gears. So are you saying, Clark, that you have dyno results and you're trying to extrapolate something else from that? I don't know which way you're trying to extrapolate. Yeah, the Wallace Racing stuff is awesome because there's so much there. I learned about gear ratios years ago in GT2. I went through all of that because I had to calculate all this stuff for Bonneville. So we had to calculate different tire sizes because we have different tire sizes available to us. I ended up using a 26-inch tire on the Civic. And so I had to calculate all the different potential speeds at different RPM. So I had this huge spreadsheet for these different transmissions because we had all of these different B series transmissions, and then all of these different available B series final drives, and then we had a custom one made, and then all of these different tire size combinations, and so all of this stuff we use to determine how high do we want to rev it, what speed do we want to go in fifth gear, where will we be in fourth gear, so at what mile an hour will we be at RPM in fifth gear, so that we know that the critical fourth to fifth gear shift We know what the drop is. All that stuff had to be calculated, and it's all. I didn't use Wallace Racing for any of that. I just did the math on it, and it was in it. I wish Wallace Racing was, and it probably was around. I just didn't know about it back then. Admiral, you can email me about the manifold that you're talking about, but it's it's not like I haven't tested short runner and long runner manifolds on beheaded motors. Ever picked up a wheel and tire assembly from a Honda Insight? Those tires are special, made by Michelin to be very light. Yeah, Ken, if you pick up the wheel and tire package on a Honda Civic VX, you'll find a similar thing. Probably not quite like the Insight, but that's one thing that they did do is that wheel and tire package was ultra light because they were trying to get good fuel mileage. They even used an aluminum AC bracket because they're trying to keep the weight down. We use 13x7 spun aluminum racing wheels for some company back east that weigh 7 pounds each. You have to be careful mounting slicks on them or you could bend them. I found a way to tune the factory Yaris ECM. We didn't. We just used we put on an AEM. Richard, have you been able to test the performance design intake? Not yet. The Julius, I like those Boss manifolds. I was really impressed with those. Mazda Millennium wheels were the secret lightweight wheels for autocrossers back in the day. Admiral, it doesn't have to be 16 different runners with dividers in them. It doesn't have to be that kind of manifold. It can be whatever you want it to be. So have you ever made a wheel and tire change that felt like it made less power? 68% are saying yes. I'm going to end that poll. I've seen headers on a 4V with 2 primaries for each cylinder. Kazi did that stuff. Although after talking to him, he said, after we spent so much time making them, we just had to run them, but we really didn't get anything from them. How hard were you spinning the engine to Bonneville? We only ran... We spun the motor faster in 4th gear so that we could get the split between 4th and 5th better. So we spun it to 86 or 8700 in 4th gear. And then I think we were only running 82 or 300 in 5th gear. Just pulled 7,500 pounds, 3 hours with my 99 Navigator. Nice. What does Kazi know? Yeah, what's he ever done? What has he ever done? Except win at everything. Yours will be the last one, Alexandra. Off topic, is there a recommended limit on valve lift for Windsor for a reliable daily driver? Those two things are not, you shouldn't be thinking about that. The lift has less to do with what you're doing with the camshaft than duration, but they're both important. So you should be looking at how much power am I trying to make, and then what are the other things that are going to go along with the camshaft that I choose. Do I have the right intake manifold? Do I have the right cylinder heads? Lift is not the thing. If you just add lift to a stock cam, it's going to do very little. And on that note, it is time to go. It's Saturday night. Come on. Thank you guys all for showing up. I will see you all tomorrow.